So as I said, I came to USA Football about 5 years ago, and I was hired by this gentleman. This is Matt Sicchio, and he's the former general counsel at USA Football. And then he left about 3 years ago to go to ESIX, which is a company that focuses on risk management for national governing bodies. And he was able to take what he learned at football and with soccer and to apply that with his knowledge of sports into helping us to manage our risk. So Matt, tell us more about you.
Good morning. How many people will walk out of the room if I admit to being a Patriots fan? One. For the last one in the room just turned around and walked out. I grew up in Boston as a child, just outside of Boston as a child, actually. Does anybody know the name Gino Cappelletti? Anybody remember that name? Yeah. It's my next door neighbor. So I was born into it, as they say. So when I played tackle football in the backyard with improper techniques, the ball went over the fence into his yard. As Jen said, the other thing about me is I have the most dull sort of combination, right? I'm a lawyer and I work in insurance now. So appreciate you all coming out this morning to listen to that. I spent 5 years at USA Football, 3 years in the US Soccer Foundation, so I have quite a bit of experience in the administrative side of sport, and then for the last 3 years I've been working on the insurance side. Real quick just about us so that you get a sense for kind of what we do. This is a brief kind of brag sheet for ESIX. Important just context for you to understand that when I come to this conversation, I bring that background from working at USA Football, from working at the US Soccer Foundation, but also working across multiple dozens of different sports at different levels. We do everything from amateurs up through the pros, all the way to the PGA Tour, WTA and ATP tennis tours, professional teams, as you can see up there, down to the grassroots. And we're thrilled that USA Football is in the middle of that chart right there, of that slide. We've been working with USA Football for a number of years. When I was in Jen's seat, we engaged ESIX, so we're very proud to have been along for the ride. I share this because part of what you'll hear from me a little bit later is going to be the insurance industry perspective on football and kind of how that's influencing what you do and what we collectively do on a move forward basis. I just want you to know that's informed not only by what's happening in football, but what's happening across sport with risk management and insurance.
So today, we want you to be able to leave this session with a couple discrete goals in mind. So first, we want you to know a little bit more about risk management and insurance. That's the nuts and bolts. We want you to understand some of the challenges that are facing football from an insurance perspective. How is that, what's going on in the insurance field as a whole, and how is that trickling down to you as you try and do your renewals, and what's going on there? 3, we want to hear from each of you. You guys are experienced, you've been in the trenches, you have been developing a culture of risk management. And we want to learn from each of you and from each other. And we also want Matt to hear this, because Matt meets with people in insurance every week, and that he needs to hear from you and take that back to the insurance industry as to what's going on in the field. Finally, we want you to be thinking about specific actions that you can take to build a culture of risk management in your organization. We want you to leave here with discrete things, like with an action plan. And we think that that's important, that this isn't just esoteric talk, that you will leave here with concrete things to do.
Yeah, just a couple of things I would say. Interrupt us as we go. This isn't necessarily roundtable discussion kind of format with the way the room is set up, but this is much better if you just interrupt and ask questions, share your opinion, disagree with us, rather than being a lecture.
Yeah, and we encourage some of you, if coming in the back, there's room in the front, and we'll have a better discussion if we are up closer and able to communicate with each other. And
I'll share as context, in advance of this session, I reached out to a number of insurance carriers just to get their latest perspective on football. And so to Jen's point, what I'm bringing to you today is sort of up to the minute input and perspective from them, but what they asked in return is what does this community need? What are the challenges? What are they looking for? How can we kind of work together on a move forward basis? So truly what Jen described, the information we gather from you both here today, but also as I participate in this conference on a larger basis, will inform key decision makers in the insurance industry who are contemplating, do I even want to insure football, which is a very real question these days. I know we're at a football conference. I picked this quote, not Jen, but hopefully you all can appreciate the accomplishments of Coach John Wooden If you haven't read his books on leadership are fantastic. I pulled this from Wooden on Leadership. It's one I use quite a bit with our clients, just to reinforce the notion that what you do on a daily basis, you're building programs, you're building teams, you're building organizations, and you're building success over months and years. And it takes a lot of work. It's a grind. And that work can be undone in minutes, per John Wooden's quote there, by somebody making a decision that is not consistent with your culture, or taking an action that's not consistent with your culture. And that, frankly, is what made UCLA so successful during the John Wooden era, is this sense that you were part of a continuum of a culture that he had built over decades. And your action as an individual player or coach could undo that. So I encourage you to think about that with your teams back in your organization. Do we have a culture where everybody understands their action impacts the overall success of our organization and could undo it? Again, kind of the negative lens, worst case scenario, but that's what we do as lawyers and risk managers.
You could call us doom and gloom.
So this seems a little bit elementary, but really, really important, I think, because we had hands earlier, how many are coaches in any form? You might be a coach and an administrator. Okay. How many are just pure administrators? Okay. So when we define risk management for our clients, it's not sexy. Surprise, right? Shocker. Not sexy whatsoever, but really important. It's a process. It's a process of identifying, assessing, and mitigating risk in order to achieve a predictable outcome. That predictable outcome, does that sound familiar to anybody who's a coach? And I didn't share earlier the other thing, and I'm going to admit to, I'm not built like a football player. I was a college soccer player. I'm a soccer coach, but I coach 2 soccer teams. I'm a parent. I'm on a board of a youth club. Predictable outcomes is what I ask from my athletes. You guys looking for that from your athletes? Right? There's a reason we train part whole. There's a reason why I build a practice plan the way I do. I want predictable outcomes from my athletes. You need to be looking at your business and your organization in the same fashion. Are we building good habits and processes within our business that the outcomes are predictable from a risk management perspective? Insurance carriers hate surprises. They know you're going to have claims and you have risk, but as long as those are predictable and fall within the expected kind of realm, we're good, right? It's those unexpected ones that fall outside the margins because you didn't have a predictable outcome or an effective process in place that get us into trouble. So I am an insurance broker, but I'm going to talk very little about insurance that I think you should buy, because for us, insurance really is the last piece, and really your best insurance policy is your ongoing risk management process. So when I talk to sports businesses and organizations and teams of any kind, I talk about risk management strategies across this sort of spectrum. Are there things we do that we just shouldn't do? Should we avoid certain risks? That's a strategy for risk management. And I think actually we don't ask ourselves that enough. Are there things we're doing today that we really just shouldn't do? The risk doesn't equate to the reward. Can we transfer some of the risk we have to others who are responsible, right? And it might be a venue, it might be a vendor or a partner. Is there a way in which we can transfer some of that risk from us to those third parties? We'll talk a little bit more about some of these in depth. Risk mitigation. Are there best practices that we ought to be implementing in our organization that limit risk? And we'll talk about this as well, that make sure that we're not an outlier relative to everybody else in our industry, right? That we're doing those things that everybody else is doing. You don't want to be in that deposition where the plaintiff's attorney is saying, well, Ms. Phelps, everybody else is doing it this way. You decided to do it this way. Why is that?
We don't want that.
Risk acceptance is, are there certain things we know there's an inherent risk, but we're just going to pay for it? We don't need to buy insurance against that potential risk. Either it's so unlikely or the cost is so low. If it does happen, we're not going to insure it, but we're going to do it, and we're not worried about it really. And then by design at the end for us is insurance really. You're buying insurance to cover those potential risks that do have a little bit more severity or cost that you need to be able to cover and still operate your business after that incident occurs. So this is just kind of an outline of different strategies we encourage you to be thinking about within your business.
And one thing is that, when I talk to our staff at USA Football, my primary message is that the first level of risk management is doing an excellent job. Whether you are building courses or a trainer at a player safety coach clinic, or you are on our events team, putting together this event here that we're all attending, their job is to do it with excellence. And when you do that, when you have your eye out and you're doing your job, that's the first step. That's the first step of reducing risk. These things layer on top of that. But they're the base level, every single member of our organization.
So we wanted to dive into a few of these, and we could spend full sessions on each one of those bullets, but we'll just dive in a little bit of detail to kind of maybe generate some thinking that will lead to some discussion later. On the risk transfer side, just some things to keep in mind. A waiver and release is a risk transfer. You're transferring the risk of potential injury or death to the athlete and their family in exchange for giving them the opportunity to play this wonderful game of football and learn football values in the process. Right? That's the exchange you're giving. That is a transfer of risk to a third party. Waiver enforceability, and we'll get into the weeds a little bit here, is a state law issue. So in some states, your waivers are going to be more enforceable perhaps than the person who's sitting next to you in their state. And you want to understand that. We're not here to give you all individual legal advice in your state today, but if you don't have a lawyer on your board or a legal outside counsel that you're paying, find a friend in your community who can help you understand this. Even when enforceability is in doubt, this is a key one for our clients. A waiver helps establish an assumption of risk. So insurance carriers are going to require you to get a waiver even if in your state waivers are completely unenforceable, say for minors, right? And the argument is we'll still use that document in court if there's a claim to establish that you as the parent or the athlete assumed the risk. The waiver's not going to get us out on summary judgment early in the case, get that claim tossed, but during the course of the litigation we can use that as evidence on our behalf. So don't, just because somebody tells you, hey, waivers aren't worth the paper they're written on, I disagree.
An assumption of the risk is this principle that you understand that what you are doing has risk, that it's potentially dangerous. So by having the parent sign that and say, I understand that my child may get hurt while playing football, that has value, even if the waiver doesn't get the case dismissed right off the bat.
Retention practices are really important. Again, sort of the wonky, nerdy weeds of this as lawyers. In most states, the statute of limitations on a tort claim, so somebody getting a bodily injury in one of your football programs, doesn't start ticking until they reach the age of majority, so until they reach 18 years old. So if you have a 7-year-old playing football today, the statute of limitations doesn't even start running for 11 years, and on top of that, you may get 2 or 3 years within the statute of limitation. All that is to say, and we see this every single day, the claim against your organization may come 15 years later after the quote-unquote occurrence. And you need to put your hand on that waiver at that moment, which historically was a significant challenge when coaches had boxes of waivers in their garage that got flooded and can't read it, can't find that particular one. In this day and age of electronic waivers and at least electronic scanning and storage, it should be a much less daunting task for you. But your retention policies should, you should be thinking effectively, I need to retain this almost forever. Yes?
The electronic signature waiver is good at?
It's still not quite as good as what they call a wet signature. The question was, is an electronic signature good enough? But the law has evolved, not just in waivers, but in all sort of transactional life these days, to accept and enforce electronic signatures. We encourage our clients, yes, it's just much more efficient to collect it and store it, even if it's slightly less desirable than the wet signature, and it's not very long from now in which the wet signature is going to be antiquated.
Okay. I would disagree a little bit. I think it is just as enforceable. The thing is that you just have to have a couple protections when you're doing your electronic signature. You just have to be able to authenticate and get it back so that you have some sort of verification that the person who typed in their name is the person who they say they are. So it used to be that your signature could be tied back to you. It's the same idea, we're just trying to do it digitally. So there's tasks for that.
Yeah, arguably over time it's getting easier to authenticate identity with electronic technology. I got off the phone with a leading electronic waiver company not that long ago. I asked the question, what's coming next in your world? And he said, biometrics, things like thumbprints and retinal scans when you sign a waiver. They're building the technology today to be able to do that. They think that's coming next. So as a parent, you're going to have your retina scanned when you sign the electronic waiver for your child, which is a little scary what database that's going to into all that, but that's coming.
So that's kind of a way.
Yeah, this is all being driven by these state law cases where waivers are being found unenforceable. Again, kind of state law issue. I think the takeaway for you all is the retention issue. And again, if somebody gives you that advice that a waiver is not worth the paper it's written on, again, would strongly disagree. Okay, read your contracts. This is more in Jen's wheelhouse than mine.
Yes. So even my advice, I know that all of your organizations, you may or may not have an attorney on your board or as part of the organization, and I understand that it's expensive. So if I, without giving you legal advice, if I was in your shoes, what I would do when looking at a contract, and what I do in my job, is I look at a couple key provisions. The first is the insurance provisions. When we've talked about risk transfer, the overarching philosophy that USA Football takes with our risk transfer is USA Football will be responsible for our liability. If we do something negligent, then we'll make that right, okay? And so we need to make sure that we have the insurance to cover that risk that we are taking on. But likewise, we're asking the parties that we contract with to do the same, and that if they are liable, they will also cover that. And they need the insurance to cover that risk as well. So one, I need to look at how much insurance is being asked and whether it's the right kind of insurance. So the big basic one is general liability. But sometimes you get into things about, we do things with media, and that you need to make sure that if there's reputational damage to somebody, that there's media coverage. So you have to look at the type of insurance and how much, and on both sides. We need enough insurance, and we need the contracting party, this convention center, to have its insurance as well. Yes?
So you're retraining the paperwork, and some states have statute of limitations on waivers, or statute of limitations on coming back legally on injuries. It seems to me like that with concussions, we might be entering a new era because some of those laws may change because the effects may not be seen for years and years. So let's say that happens and someone comes back years and years later for an injury sustained in high school football or youth football or whatever. Of course, the insurance is no longer in effect, so are the people, there's no risk transfer still in effect 15 years from now, I would assume. I'm asking, I guess.
Yes.
I'll take that one.
Go for it.
I'll take that one. Most, if not all, general liability policies are written on what's called an occurrence basis. So when the occurrence happened, now concussions get complicated with potential repeated injuries and determining exactly when the occurrence was that led to the particular damages they're alleging. Was it that concussion, or was it one you got later falling off the monkey bars, right? But let's put that aside for a moment. The insurance that's going to respond is the insurance that was in place at the time the occurrence happened. So that insurance is still effective, and I'm going to talk about that in a little while. That's why insurance carriers right now are running scared from football. Not scared, but they're just running away from football, is what we call this long tail, that there could have been a concussion that happened to my child when he was 7, 10 years ago that comes to light today. Insurance policy.
After X number of days or months, we are no longer responsible. That's not true.
No, technically
depends on the
you
policy.
have an obligation under an insurance policy to give the insurance carrier notice of any incident that might give rise to a claim. If they might deny you later, it may be that, hey, you knew that kid had a serious head injury at the time, you didn't report it to us, now we have a claim. Your fault for not reporting it to us. We are going to deny that claim. But had you followed those, we'll assume you followed the proper procedures, you submitted that to them when it happened, when the occurrence happened, and now 15 years later the claim comes, they're covering it. And that's why they're worried right now, because they've got, in their mind, unlimited amount of those claims and dollars sitting out for past claims that may come to bear today, tomorrow, 5 years from now.
And one clarification is Matt's talking about a general liability claim. So there's also accident and health insurance or participant accident insurance, and that is usually just for the year that you buy the insurance, and that's going to cover, it's no-fault insurance. If a participant gets hurt and they have medical claims in that year, it will pay it. But at the end of that year, that insurance is...
So there would be no likelihood of coming back on them 15 years.
Right. So, okay.
Good question. And we're going to explore that a little bit more. So if we don't fully answer your question, we'll get to it.
So, well, I was about to talk about indemnification provisions. Indemnification is this idea that if USA Football is liable and we're in a contract with you, we say that, and so it's our fault, something happens, that if you get pulled into the lawsuit as well, that we will pay your defense costs and any settlement cost with it. So, when I'm looking at a contract, I'm looking at the insurance provisions, and I'm looking at those indemnification provisions and how we are promising to each other that we will take care of each other if everybody gets brought into a lawsuit. So I'm reading those very carefully. And then the most important thing is, if you don't understand it, don't sign it. Sometimes the parts that can make my head hurt the most when I'm trying to decipher through what's happening with the provision, that's really where I need to pay attention more. It costs money, but it can save you in the end to get some legal advice on this.
Okay, let's move on to risk management, kind of best practices in the mitigation area. So we've talked about transferring risk. Now let's talk about how we mitigate risk. On the risk mitigation side, best practices, as Jen said, I think at the outset, which is do what you do really well as your first line of defense. Be a great football organization. Teach great technique. Okay, keep doing that. Associated with that, how many in here have a code of conduct or a code of ethics for your organization? Okay, and I'll explain this one here, Jen, and we'll probably say it again later. Better to not have it at all if you're not going to do it. If you're going to have it, you better be doing it, right? A plaintiff's attorney loves nothing more than to say you knew well enough to have this policy or this code of ethics, but you did not enforce it and it resulted in this. Again, as your risk manager, if I were your risk manager, I'd say, if you're not going to enforce it, I'd rather have you not have it at all. Of course, I'd love for you to have it and enforce it, if not exceed it. Second one, comply with your sport's best practices for safety and training and competition environments. Again, this is something I use with all of our clients. Don't be an outlier. It'd be great if you were sort of at the forefront, but certainly don't be lagging, don't be an outlier. Safe sport is a phrase. How many of you in the room have heard this phrase, safe sport, or is that new to you? Okay, just a handful. This is really coming out of the Olympic movement. And if you saw, it started with USA Swimming scandal several years back, and USA Gymnastics has been in the news recently for their challenges in this space of sexual abuse and molestation within their sport on a systemic basis. And so the Olympic movement through the United States Olympic Committee created something called Safe Sport, which is a code of conduct, as well as they're now rolling out actually a center that will take responsibility for adjudicating and investigating claims of sexual misconduct for your purposes. They have great resources on how to manage this issue of potential sexual abuse and molestation going on within your organization. It also gets down to the level of bullying and hazing. It doesn't necessarily just have to be sexual misconduct, but physical, emotional misconduct, hazing, bullying, etc. There's some great resources. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, so USA Football has taken the Safe Sport resources and created a model policy for youth football organizations. As I think some of you know, we've just relaunched our website, and that page is set to launch, it's going to relaunch here shortly. So you can't find it today on our website, but you should be able to find it in a week or so is our hope. But so the Safe Sport policy and resources are great because it holistically looks at misconduct in sport beyond just the sexual abuse, but it also packages it in a sport-friendly way for people who go through the course. That it's coaches talking about how to, it's talking about in the coaching environment how you should set up this culture to prevent misconduct. So I highly recommend it, and look back on our website in a week or two, and hopefully it will be back up. So
Here's just a couple of highlights from that content that I thought were important for this group. Things like minimizing unsupervised one-on-one interactions with athletes. It's something we have to worry about, unfortunately, in our society these days is, should I really be having that conversation one-on-one with the athlete, or do I need to have a parent there, or at least somebody else, so that somebody else can corroborate what was actually said and done? If you are going to conduct individual meetings with athletes, again, is somebody else present, or is it in the public space where other people can observe it? Are we getting written permission from parents if we're conducting one-on-one training sessions, encouraging parents to attend those? I don't think that happens quite as much in your sport as much as some of our other clients who have individual sports where coaches are really training athletes one-on-one, but I imagine some of you do train your athletes one-on-one. And as Jen noted, there's the USOC's Safe Sport Handbook is online, and they have online training modules. It's not something you can just flip a switch and do this overnight, but you need to be thinking about it, because I'm going to touch on momentarily after concussion, sexual abuse and molestation is the single biggest concern from an insurance and risk management perspective for your sport and other amateur sports.
And just to be clear, that their Safe Sport certification video is free. So it takes away a lot of barriers if it's free. So and it's really good.
So
Okay.
I previewed this earlier at the beginning. Again, I did ask for feedback from insurance carriers just in minutes or days coming prior to this presentation. I wanted to share some of that feedback with you. I think it's informative and hopefully will lead to some more questions and discussion. So quick context. In my world, again, you saw the slide at the beginning, we insure all sorts of sports, including things like drone racing. Anybody know that you can now be a professional drone pilot? We insure that. So from that all the way to mud runs and rugby and hockey, and we're insuring contact sports, non-contact sports, and arguably things that aren't sports. But there are maybe 10 insurance carriers in the marketplace who insure sports businesses. Of those, 5 or 6 are actually really good at it, truly understand it. The others kind of come and go as the market is to their benefit. But 5 or 6 are in it for the long haul and are good at it. Of those 5 or 6 over time, and I'm looking at John, he lives in this world as well, that number that are willing to do amateur tackle football is shrinking, right? We started with a pretty low number and it's shrinking. So important context to understand that we don't have a vast marketplace of people who are lining up to insure amateur tackle football. It's just the reality. And so some of the challenges that we're facing, we have to be honest with ourselves. If we want to continue to be insurable, we need to overcome some of those challenges. Whoops. So primary concerns that we hear from insurance carriers, shocker, right? Brain injury claims. But I'll tell you, it's severity. So if any one individual brain injury could be very costly and expensive, costly and expensive. Second piece is this long tail idea that we talked about with the gentleman in the corner earlier, that what has insurance carriers extremely scared right now, and I literally just got this email last night from yet another one, is we still don't know if we're on the hook for $100 million, $500 million, whatever it might be from claims that occurred, let's just say roughly prior to 2010, right, when concussion really came into the forefront. It's hard to argue after that time that as a parent I didn't know it was a potential risk, right? But insurance carriers say, yeah, we understand that, because I have this argument with them all the time. Hey, at this point in time, every parent knows this is a risk. Why is it still so hard to insure football? And they said, we still don't know what our past bottom line is. And until we do and have that certainty, we're not taking any more risk looking forward. So that long tail is a significant challenge. Class action claims are extremely expensive to defend and deal with, and insurance carriers are very concerned about that in the space of amateur football. And we've seen them. As I noted, sexual abuse and molestation claims, this is across all amateur sport. This is not just a football issue. And brain injury, by the way, is not just a football issue, but this one in particular is extremely active these days. These are the 2 highest types of claims we see with our clients, are the brain injuries and the sexual abuse and molestation claims. This one, interesting that those are not my words. Those are the words chosen by the insurance carrier, that they are concerned about continued social pressure and negative publicity specific to amateur tackle football. That the idea that the negative publicity and the pressure is going to lead to more litigation. Frankly, that people are going to see the public discourse and believe that there's more opportunity for them to litigate a football injury. And insurance carriers are concerned about that. And the bottom line, they're in a business to make money, and sometimes it's hard to remember that, but that is what they're in the business to do. And again, these are not my words. This is almost a direct quote. There's very little upside right now for them to insure football. Because of the uncertainty of claims and the history, they just don't see it as a profitable area of business. So what are they doing about that? Important to understand, and many of you, whoever you work with to place your insurance ought to be aware of these, and if they're not, you ought to be asking them questions about these issues. So the response has been, certain carriers just won't even write football. They're just out of the business. They'll write every other sport, maybe not rugby, but football, for sure they're out of that business. The second is they might just limit football risk to where it's packaged with something bigger, right? So you're bringing me all of your amateur sports risk in your community that might include, soccer, baseball, basketball, whatever, and football is just one part, small part of that risk. Okay, we'll take it. But if it was football alone, we wouldn't take it. sorry, I needed to go back. The extreme vetting, sorry for using a term that's been in the public discourse, I just couldn't help myself. There's certainly increased scrutiny right now that as a football organization, you're going to get a harder look at your insurance applications and supporting materials than another organization in a different sport might. So be prepared for that. Coverage restrictions that we're seeing, so insurance policies themselves may cover every other type of claim but exclude brain injuries. It may sublimit. And so what that means is, say you have $1 million per occurrence, so per injury for all types of injuries, you may only have $500,000 of coverage if it's a brain injury. That's called a sublimit. It's one of the ways that insurance carriers can kind of cap their risk. And that can be done at the per occurrence level, or say you have a $5 million aggregate limit, which means over the course of the entire year or policy term, your insurance carrier is willing to pay up to $5 million. They might say, but for brain injuries, we're only going to pay up to $1 million. Okay, they might just exclude brain injuries in the excess layer. So I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but some of you have primary general liability and then what we call an excess or umbrella policy. You might be lucky enough to have brain injury coverage on the primary level. Chances are you don't have it at the excess level because that's the catastrophic, hey, we're going to add another $5 million of limits above that. They don't want to expose that to brain injury claims. And then the last one is not to be overlooked too quickly. Defense costs inside the limits. In our world, the cost of legal defense can either be part of your limits of insurance or outside. If it's outside, that's great, right? Because the insurance carrier defends you, and then whatever they need to pay in settlement or damages, you have the full access to your full limits of insurance. Insurance carriers are now, for brain injuries for sure, putting those legal costs inside the limit. So if it costs you $500,000 to defend that lawsuit, and you have $1 million per occurrence limit, you only have $500,000 left now to pay the actual damages. Price increases, absolutely. And then more skin in the game, more deductibles and retentions for you, that if you're going to have a brain injury claim, you're going to pay the first $25,000, $100,000, whatever it is. That's a strategy being used. So, okay, to the nuts and bolts, and sorry, Jen, for the timing. I'll run through this. So what do? We said at the beginning we want you to be able to leave here with some actions you can take. 4 or 5 things here. First, commit to risk management. Build an organizational culture, as we said, that emphasizes risk management. Hire, fire, reward, recognize based on risk management results, not just on the field results. Okay, are your coaches, administrators, parents following your code of conduct? Are they implementing are they following through and getting certified? Are they actually teaching what they were taught to teach in that certification course? Don't be a late adopter. Proactively implement best practices. And don't just limit your view to football. Be willing to look at other amateur sports and what they're doing.
We found that at USA Football that we do that a lot. So the American development model that we are really excited to be developing right now, that's looked to other sports. That's looked to hockey and to tennis and to other sports to say, how are they developing their athletes, and how does that contribute to this culture of safety and to making sure that's right age, right stage. That's a good step. Safe sport is another one. That it was the USOC, and when USA Football started to try and work with the US Olympic Committee more, that we were introduced to safe sport and saw what a great, valuable resource it was, and looked at what other sports were doing to address misconduct in sport. So don't be afraid to look outside of our football view. There's other great things that are happening in other sports.
We talked about number 3 already, which is do what you say you're going to do. Again, if you have it written, it's in writing, you've committed to doing it, follow through, do it. That's a pretty simple risk management step, but a lot of organizations take that for granted, and it results in claims. Keep an open mind. Again, having worked at USA Football for a number of years, I get it, and I truly believe in the history of this great sport, and I think we can honor that great history of this sport, but be open-minded to structural changes to respond to some of these challenges. It's not easy to do, and I get that, but I would just urge you from the perspective of risk management and trying to be an insurable sport moving forward that if we can be open to those structural changes and proactive, that's going to help us. And then this prepare for increased scrutiny and requirements from insurance carriers. I'd say if I were in your shoes, if I were your risk manager, and probably none of you can afford to pay, maybe not none of you, but most of you cannot afford to pay somebody to just be your risk manager. If I was your risk manager, I would be putting together my own narrative about us, right? Rather than reacting to an insurance carrier asking me all these difficult questions and probing and prodding, I'd go with my own narrative that says, here's what we are, here's what we do have a culture of risk management, and here's how we execute it. Okay, control that narrative a little bit better. We tend to be on the defensive with insurance carriers rather than being on the offensive and telling our story, which is a great story. Okay, if we do it well, let's embrace that. On the flip side, I would say one of the things that caught my attention when I asked for some feedback in the lead up to this presentation was I had an insurance carrier tell me, we think it's not too long in the future before we're going to ask that parents of football players be on video reciting a waiver, so that when it comes to the question of enforceability of waivers, which we talked about earlier, there's no question that you understood it, and it's you. You're on camera, you read it, you acknowledged it, and so I don't see that coming tomorrow. I don't say that to scare the heck out of you and figure out how you're going to do that tomorrow. It's an example of the things that might come down the pike where it might impact football before it impacts other sports. It's actually not that new of an idea. We used to, did anybody remember the Eco Challenge? No, it was on like the Discovery Channel or something. It was this outdoor, like, orienteering, kayaking, swimming, running thing. We actually had to do this for them, and that was 15 years ago. We had to do video releases because it was so dangerous. But we're now at a point where that sort of very fringe, very dangerous activity that required this, now we have insurance carriers thinking maybe we ought to do that with football.
So actually, let's stop here. Yeah, we are at the end. Okay, so with these things, can you go back a slide, Matt? That how can we and should we respond? I'd like to hear from you guys as to, are there examples in there of things that you've done? I know John Butler's here from Pop Warner, and we followed his lead on things. That Pop Warner is doing some things really great about limiting practice time and how they are working with their coaches. What examples are out here of where you guys are doing these 5 things that you could share with this group? Yeah.
So we've done a lot with our league rules and officiating, with watching rough play, helmet-to-helmet contact, unnecessary roughness, that kind of thing. Suspensions have followed. We've taken kids out of to teach them the right way to play. Mm-hmm. And also with Ohio, we're required to keep injury records of every injury that occurs, no matter how minor, and follow it through all the way through the protocols to put them back on the field. So nobody enters that field again until they followed the protocol, and we have a sign-off from a doctor and that they've finished all of it. So we've done those kind of things. But putting a parent on a video for a waiver, you want to say, look, this is really dangerous, so we're going to video you. Then how are you going to put them back on the field to begin with at all?
Yeah, and I knew I'd get that kind of reaction. I shared that because it was kind of out there. I don't think it's a mainstream ask. Don't expect that tomorrow. But again, this is the thing, that insurance carriers are starting to think about. How can we overcome this issue and concern?
We have a return to play policy also in our league, but it's only on concussions, not necessarily broken bone or sprained ankle or anything like that, where you have to have a note from your doctor before you can return to play. Another thing also is keeping our referees trained to for like targeting and things like that during play to get the kids out of the game that are being rough.
Got a few more here. Walk down the line.
We implemented a policy of background checks through NCSI.
Mm-hmm.
We had done local background checks before and also used another national company that will go unnamed. Coaches passed, and when we went back through the background checks through NCSI, we actually had red flags show up on coaches. We had to fire those coaches, no contact with kids because of whatever happened in their background. We actually had a threatened lawsuit from a coach, so I had to go retain an attorney. This culture will cause some bumps in the road and some pain, but absolutely worth it for parents.
And background checks are one of those really big ones that if you set a policy that you're going to do background checks and then you get a record back that something's happened, you need to follow your policy on what you do with that record, because saying, oh, she's really great or he's a great guy, I've known him for decades, like, oh, that was just a bump in the road. That's not following your policy. And And all the good reasons why you do background checks get eroded when you don't follow it. So
Yeah, that's one of the bigger challenges we have with our client base on background checks. You'd be surprised, the most seasoned executives who've run businesses worth tens of millions of dollars are playing God on background checks because they're saying it came back, yeah, as a red flag, but I know that person or somebody else knows that person. That is not where you want to be from a risk management perspective. Draw your line and stick to it. If your line is returning results that you don't think are appropriate, reevaluate the line, but don't do it on an individual basis.
The problem is local background check will not appear. I mean, some of the background will not appear on a local background check. But different companies have different criteria that they're going to look for across a background check. And when you have a coach who's been with your organization for 5 or 6 years, and he's passed and passed and passed and passed, and then suddenly you go, hey man, you can't be back on the field effective immediately.
it's a hard discussion.
That's a hard discussion to have. And then they want to ask the insurance. They show me the insurance policy. Show me where it says I can't be.
It's not your insurance policy.
What?
It is your league or school policy as to what your standards
yeah,
are.
Jen, I'll say some insurance carriers will require you to have the background screening and
Insurance policy through USA
Yep.
Football, we said you will have one, and we signed saying we will do one, and if anyone who fails.
I'm sorry, your name tag is turned around. What's your name, sir? Barry is absolutely correct that there are going to be bumps in the road. What we advise our clients is you'd rather err on the side of that coach bringing that defamation lawsuit than the parent or the child later bringing a lawsuit that you knew about something, you did not take action on it, and now this child and maybe many others were impacted. It's a very difficult decision. Easy for me to stand here academically and say that, but having lived in Jen's shoes, I appreciate that bump in the road. It's real.
This is not a legal thing. It's more of a league or association of league practice. We limit our ball carriers to only half of the game, so that kind of keeps, and it's a retention thing as well. But it keeps injuries down. It it helps to keep kids in the game more. And so that's just one of the things that we've done.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Matt, this question's for you. When you were collecting this information from carriers about those who are simply not wanting to insure that risk in amateur tackle, did you get a sense that it was really leaning towards the youth space because of the age of the player versus a high school format?
It's a great question, Ron, and I, in this particular exercise, no, it was not specific. I asked generally about amateur football. I'll tell you, historically, those conversations I've had have informed me that they're more concerned at the high school level in terms of the severity of injuries, right? That the bigger, faster kids, bigger, faster collisions, that in fact high school football in their mind might be more risky than amateur football. Okay, the struggle at the amateur football level is it's not as closely governed from their perspective, right? There's not as much top-down governance in the high school space. You understand that we've got school districts and coaching associations and professional coaches, and we're a little bit more concerned from a carrier perspective at the youth level about that level of administration and structure and oversight. And many of you, and probably most of you, because you've taken the time to come here, are excellent at that. But you're not representative from the insurance carrier's perspective as to what's happening in every league, and they have that concern at the youth level. Does that make sense?
I had two questions. One to know if anyone in the room, I'm from Los Angeles Unified, and the first part was I wanted to know from you guys, are there any high school associations that, like in baseball and softball and basketball, most sports, there's an official roster for the game, whereas in where we are, there is no official record of who actually participated in the game. And that sometimes when you're dealing with liability, we have those issues of who is actually monitoring or tracking who's in the game. And the second part of that too is because of charter schools and building new schools, some of our teams have gotten really small, and I wanted to know if there was any group out there that had like minimum number of players, because we've seen people that have played full varsity games with like 15, 16 guys suited up, and you're just like, okay, how long can you do this before you're really just exposing everyone to more liability? Yeah, this was more of a high school thing, but or it could even be a youth policy. But those are the two challenges, the lack of a official game day roster.
I would just make it your own policy. I would do your own roster anyways, and if you're playing on your field, make the other team give you an official roster too.
Is there not a state law out
There's
there?
not a state law, that's crazy.
I,
But I would, as your personal self, I think that you should just implement it for you and your kids, so it's there. That's what I would do.
But show of hands, is anybody doing this? Does anybody have a way to document who actually played in the game and who did not? Okay. Game day. Okay.
so this is a good discussion, and we're happy to keep talking. I just want to let everybody know that Bill Polian begins his talk in 3 minutes. So there is no offense if you want to leave. If you would like to stay and talk, Matt and I can keep ourselves available.
Thank you all for coming and for your attention.